My first guest this Sunday, is a gentleman who is very well known in the community. He was the chief probation department head for family court in New Bedford. He's now retired, and he has also been someone who I think is considered, to some extent, a historian about New Bedford and about its history and about its history, the minority history especially. He's here with us to talk about Frederick Douglass Read-A-Thon, which is scheduled for February 11th in New Bedford. First of all, Carl Cruz, thank you very much for coming in.
Well, thank you for the invite.
You you're here representing an organization that has done a remarkable job, I think, in New Bedford in raising awareness about Frederick Douglass. That's the New Bedford Historical Society. Is that correct?
That is correct.
All right. What's your role with the society?
I'm one of the founding members of the Historical Society, and presently I'm the clerk and archivist at the society.
What many folks might not know is what Frederick Douglass's connection is to New Bedford. There may be some people who do not know that. We've all been educated a great deal by the Historical Association and others, Historical Society, I should say, and others, about Mr. Douglass and his role as an abolitionist and his early days in New Bedford. But for those who don't know, tell us about
Well, for those who don't know, I think one of the things that I think we should all be very proud of is the fact that Frederick Douglass actually got his name here in the city of New Bedford. He escaped from slavery in 1838, was met by several abolitionists on his way here in New Bedford, the Rickersons, and he was brought to the home of Nathan and Polly Johnson. And Nathan Johnson, who was a well-known African-American who was a confectionist, he and his wife owned lots of property in New Bedford, free African-Americans. He was reading the book, Lady of the Lakes, and by Sir Walter Scott, and in there's one of the individuals' last name is Douglass. Douglass comes to New Bedford with the name of Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey, and also wanted to take the name of Johnson because when you're in slavery, you don't want your master to be able to call you by your name. Mm-hmm. So Mr. Johnson decided, well, he was reading this book and felt that Douglass looked like that strong character in the book, and said, I think you should go by Frederick Douglass instead of Frederick Johnson, which he had wanted to go by.
And Douglass worked for a time in New Bedford, and I think probably formed a lot of his thinking about being an abolitionist and being a strong member of a community. But what happened after New Bedford with Douglass?
Well, before we go what happened to New
Sure.
Bedford, I think it's important for your listeners to know that he lived in New Bedford for 5 years, and 3 of his 5 children were born here in New Bedford. In New Bedford, it was in New Bedford that he got the right to vote. So 18 months out of slavery, he now is able to vote. That's a very powerful statement, and I think the ability to be able to have had that happen to him then catapulted him on his journey as this great lecturer, writer, and inspirational individual in our community, and actually in the world, because not only did he speak in the United States, he spoke in England, Ireland. It did not just stop. He became what we know today would be called an ambassador, but he was ambassador of Haiti. He was the first African American to be nominated to be president of a party. People didn't realize that. So these are some of the things of this powerful individual that we hope in reading his narrative on Sunday, February 11th at the Unitarian Church. And we chose the Unitarian Church because it was the minister of the Unitarian Church, Ephraim Peabody, who gave Frederick Douglass his first job as a free man. And Frederick Douglass, in this narrative, talks about getting this silver coin that he got from Ephraim Peabody, and that really catapulted him on his job and his first free money. So New Bedford was very important in terms of setting the tone for how he may reach out in the world.
All right. So before we go any further, let's just mention when it is again, the Read-A-Thon, what times, and of course at the Unitarian Church. If
Right.
you could
It's Sunday, February the 11th. It starts at 2 p.m. and it ends We say 6 p.m., but because readers, some read longer, some read shorter, we're probably done by 6:30, and it's a continuous reading.
So, and what are we hearing? What are the volunteer readers reading?
They will be reading the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, an American slave written by himself in 1845, which is the first autobiography of his life. He ends up really writing three biographies, but this is the first one, and probably the most important one, because it covers this period from 1818, his birth, to 1838. And so you really, for people who want to know about slavery and the power of an individual to try to overcome that, this is the narrative that you want to get yourself acquainted with, to understand the evils of slavery.
You're listening to Townsquare Sunday. My name is Jim Phillips. My guest is Carl Cruz of the New Bedford Historical Society, and of course they are sponsoring the Frederick Douglass Read-A-Thon on the 11th of February at the Unitarian Church in New Bedford. It begins at 2 p.m. And this event has attracted, some politicians and, folks in the community, but it's also attracted some young people. You make sure that young people are invited and take part in this. Why is that so important?
Well, because it's the young people really are our future, and we feel if we can instill in them the importance of this individual in our community and in our world, that it might inspire them this story, because it talks of you see different themes, that some of the themes are relevant today as they were 180 years almost ago. Mm-hmm. And this is our 18th year, and it coincides with the 200th anniversary of the birth of Frederick Douglass, which is something the whole country is excited all about. Mm-hmm. In fact, the Congress just passed a bill in November, and the President signed it, that this is the year that he appointed a bicentennial commission to celebrate Frederick Douglass. And we're hoping that along with these great celebrations, that New Bedford will be recognized as an important station in the life of Frederick Douglass. We certainly at the Historical Society will make sure that happens.
Now, the Historical Society, under the direction of Lee Blake, is
our president.
Very much involved in this project and as president. But she has also strived to include more about Frederick Douglass in the curriculum of public schools. I know that's always been a goal for her to do that. Is that happening?
Yes, it is. We're excited to note that all 8th graders have to read this narrative. Mm-hmm. All the middle school students. So we're excited about that. We were inspired to do this whole read-a-thon by Everett Hoagland, who was the former first poet laureate of New Bedford, and also a professor at University of Massachusetts, a well-known African-American poet in his own right. And he inspired us to do this read-a-thon. And as we said, we've been doing it for 18 years. It coincides with the 180th anniversary of Frederick Douglass coming to New Bedford in 1838. It coincides with the 200th anniversary of his birth. So, I mean, this is just an exciting year to be able to talk about Frederick Douglass. It's, as I said earlier, it's all over the nation talking about Douglass.
Mr. Cruz, let's talk for a moment about his life in New Bedford. We've certainly mentioned it, and that he did come here as a runaway slave, someone who's escaped slavery, and came here and found his name and all of that. He actually worked in New Bedford. Right?
He did work on the wharves of New Bedford. It was a whaling town, so sure. I mean, you needed a lot of manpower. It was a place that you could work, and even if you were a former slave, you would not be turned away because of the need for manpower. That's not to say that he didn't experience racism on the wharves. He talks about that in his book. but nevertheless, he still was able to use his trade. He was a copper. He worked with copper on the ships. That's what he did in Baltimore, and he was able to use some of that while he was in New Bedford.
While Douglas has a great history in New Bedford, so does the Underground Railroad. Did he use that railroad?
Yes, he did.
He use that
Yes,
system
he did.
to get here?
That secret system to come from slavery to freedom. Oh yes, definitely. He and his wife, although his wife was a free African American woman from Baltimore, he was not. So that made it a little bit easier for him to travel in some ways as well, because she was free.
All right. You're listening again to Townsquare Sunday. A reminder about the Frederick Douglass Read-A-Thon, which is February 11th. That's next Sunday. It is from 2 to 6 or so, 6:30-ish. It is a reading of his first autobiography, and it is a education. It really is an education.
Yes.
That's what it amounts to. Learning about Douglas, learning about his life. Young people being present, listening and learning. It's a wonderful afternoon. Football is done. This is a great way, I think, to spend a Sunday afternoon listening and learning. Mr. Cruz, I know that your work with the Historical Society is, obviously with this event, but also with other events upcoming. I did want to ask, I'm not sure how much you are involved in the Abolitionist Row project and the park, which is going on, and also the dig that was happening there in the fall and early winter. Can you give us any update on that?
I would really rather leave that to Lee, who that's a project that she's worked on.
Sure.
But we are excited, and we will be celebrating that in the coming months through the generous grant that we got from the state, through the efforts of Representative Cabral and Senator Montigny. We eventually will have a statue on this land that's faces the Nathan and Polly Johnson House of Frederick Douglass. So we're really excited about that. I should say, for those who do not have a copy of this narrative that we'll be reading on Sunday, the 11th, we will be giving them away at the event. At the present moment, we are giving out 200 books at the Free Public Library. All you have to do is show a library card, and you can get a free book. We're giving out 100 books at the University of Massachusetts, Dartmouth. So we're going to be giving out about 400 books to young people and those who may not be able to afford the book, just to inspire them to read it.
And this is, again, an educational event about bringing us back to a time that was a different time, but in some ways perhaps not so different. And it's a time, I think, that all of us should take a moment and reflect on just a little bit and think about it, and think about the greatness of Douglass, who, was speaking the truth for his race and for others who were oppressed. Clearly, a wonderful man, and a man who got one of his starts in New Bedford.
Yeah, and we are proud of that. It really is truth to power. He's a great example of that.
Carl Cruz of the New Bedford Historical Society. Carl, thanks very much for coming in.
Thank you very much.
We appreciate it. Again, the event, February 11th. That's a Sunday, next Sunday from 2 to 6:30-ish at the Unitarian Church in downtown New Bedford. The Frederick Douglass Read-A-Thon. Young and old will be there. I've stopped by in the past, and it's grown. More people. And
half of our readers this year will be students.
Right.
So we're proud of that.
Very good. Carl, thanks again.
Thank you again.
Townsquare Sunday will return in just a moment.